The Saw series. Finally doing it. I mean, I plan to do the Saw series last year with the release of 10, but then just time just it became a social construct, and I didn't understand what time was doing. It was just going by too quick. And then all of a sudden I was like, probably wait till next year to do it, especially since the original movie turns 20 years old. And then I believe next year we're getting the next movie. So I'm like, all right, yeah, it seemed like this was a good time to finally do it. I've been trying to get it done. Now I'm finally getting it done. So here we go. The Saw series. So Saw started out in 2004 with the first movie. It was directed by James Wan, who this was his first film, who I like quite a bit. I love *Malignant*. I like his Conjuring movies. I think he's a really talented director. I would like to see him do like a little bit more horror films. So I like him quite a bit. So this is also written by him and Leigh Whannell, who has gone on to now be like a writer and director with like the Invisible Man movie, the Blumhouse movie, that was actually really cool and inventive, and the upcoming Wolfman movie, which looks interesting. So, the fact that it's him writing and directing it, I'm trying to keep expectations a little low, but I'm really interested to see what he does with that. So this started out as a short film that then became a feature film. And they originally, I believe, they only planned for this to be one film. They didn't plan to make this a whole series or continue it after the first movie, but Hollywood, if it makes money, it will make more money. It can make more money. But anyway, with the first movie. The first film, I feel like the first one is the most simplest out of all of them, because the first one is really the story of these two guys, in a really rundown bathroom, or as somebody, I forget who, said, it looked like your typical Taco Bell bathroom. And it's just these two guys, they just wake up and they start remembering like how they know each other, how they got into the position they're at, and how can they get out. That's really, you have like multiple plots going on in this movie. Like you have the plot with these two guys, who it's Cary Elwes and Leigh Whannell. And you also have a story with, these two detectives trying to track down the Jigsaw killer, who is the one that has been orchestrating all these traps and stuff. And this was the movie where the reasoning of the Jigsaw killer was kind of unknown. It really wasn't until the series started progressing that they really started getting more into who Jigsaw is and why is he doing these things to people. And so I'll talk about more of that as, we go on with the other movies. But I would say with this one, it feels like the most simplest, and also is, I would say, the tamest out of the 10 films, because, man, I mean, it also doesn't help that it had a limited budget, but also, they didn't want it to be like, in your face gore every 5 minutes like the sequels do. They were more interested in telling a more psychological horror film, and also a detective story as well, which I feel like the series does pretty well. Like, you can actually look at this series and go, okay, you know what? I'm going to watch this series as, you can watch it as like, you know what, I'm just going to watch a whole bunch of gore thrown in my face. That can work. But also, something I feel like is a little bit misconstrued is that there's an actual story going on. It's not just about like the gore and the traps. You can watch it just for that if you want. But there's an actual story going on, and it's pretty consistent with each film. So the continuity, while it is very complex and a little bit jumbled, almost like a jigsaw puzzle, it's really interesting. Like every time that I, think about the series or go and rewatch one of the films, I go like, I find like new little pieces here and there that I didn't catch before, or like some parts, they like jump to like one movie to another, and I'll try to explain more of that as we go along. But anyway, with this first film, I think most of the acting is good. The exception is probably Leigh Whannell, because he's more of a writer at this point. He's not really an actor, but I think it was because they were limited on what they can do and who they can get. And it just, his acting, it's the way he says his lines. It's just like, yeah, you're a little wooden, buddy. You're a little wooden. But, you have someone like Cary Elwes, who I think is a talented actor. It's just that if I don't think of Princess Bride, I immediately go and think of the Oogie Loves, which, oh my God, is just an experience by itself. But then also you have Danny Glover, who is playing another cop. So in Lethal Weapon, but in this one, he's tracking down a serial killer. So it's kind of cool to see like how he can play like in Lethal Weapon, like a super like charismatic, fun, and like cool, chilled cop, and in this one he's very like more serious, like we need to catch this like killer kind of guy, kind of cop. Not saying that he did that in Lethal Weapon, but in this it feels like and there's no joking around in here. So the first film, I feel like if you watch it as a one-off, not knowing it was a series, it's a pretty interesting film. And, if you just wanted to check it out and not watch the rest of the movies, then you're totally fine with this first movie, just watching this first movie by itself. So, I quite enjoy the first movie. I think it's really, really fun. It's quite entertaining. I like how, a lot of they show you just enough gore, to make it like, you think in your head, like it's much gorier than it is. So where with the rest of the movies, they just go, hey, we're just going to show it to you in your face, and we're not going to hold back. So this one, like I said, this one feels like it's the tamest one in the entire series. So if you're not really a gore hound, but you still were kind of intrigued to watch this, the first one, I feel like you should be fine with. It's after that where I think they really start getting like, yeah, this is, nope. Like, I can't handle this. And I'm going to be completely honest. There were 3 times in this series that one of them made me kind of just like shudder and look away. 2 of them legitimately had me go, no, I gotta look away from that one. And when we get to those movies, I will bring that up. But anyway, first movie, I would give it great. I think it's, it works as just a one-off if you want to just sit, just watch the first movie, and then you're like, all right, I'm done. So, it works. It really does. So I would give the first movie a great. and it's a great first film, especially coming from James Wan. Now, this movie that cost like I think a full $1 million was just made like over $100 million. They didn't wait too long to make sequels, and then the next year we got Saw 2 in 2005. All right, Saw 2, the sequel that came out a year after the first movie in 2005. Okay, so James Wan did not come back to do this. Saw 2, 3, and 4 are directed by Darren Bousman, who, yeah, like I said, did 2, 3, and 4. And then he also decided to come back and do Spiral, but we'll get to that one later. But Leigh Whannell did stay on to help with writing, and this was co-written by him and Darren. So it takes place, I would say, maybe a little bit after the first movie, where we have the new kid, as I like to say, which is Donnie Wahlberg. He plays a detective who is tasked with trying to find Jigsaw, the Jigsaw killer. While in the meantime, it's a group of like ex-convicts, pretty much. They're trapped in like a giant house, and they must like pass a series of traps and tests. Otherwise, they're all gonna get killed. So, what I like about this movie is that it does a really good job, like with the first movie, where it, switches between, it being a detective story and also a claustrophobic type movie. And this one, I think, does it pretty good. In fact, if I'm going to say it, this is probably my favorite of the sequels. I would probably say it. Now, something about this one that I think a lot of people don't like is just how unlikable the ex-convicts are. And also, some of them make really stupid decisions. And I'm just like, well, you were stupid from minute one, so I kind of expected you to do something like this. And also, the movie doesn't really care about giving you, it's these ex-convicts. And, if you kind of paid attention to this point, in the first movie, it was really just these two guys. But there was other traps going on that were just there in the background, and it's just like, okay, they're dead. They're meat to the bone, basically. This is kind of that same thing where it's like, not everyone here is going to live, especially if, there's an antidote and there's only one of them, and they have to retrieve it within a certain amount of time, or everybody is going to get killed. So I think this does a pretty good job at keeping, the suspense going. Because like with every trap, it's like each trap has a certain like thing about it that makes it like kind of unique, and also, really interesting to like watch and see what to go through. Now, like I said with the first movie, in this series, there were 3 times during this whole series that 2 times I literally was almost I was gagging. And there was one time that made me just not want to close it made me want to close my eyes. This one had that. And all I will have to say is that if you are afraid of used syringes and needles, you're not going to like this one. You are not going to like this. I just say that right now, because it is very much like it's not like something like, you get stabbed and then it's there. This feels more like you get stabbed and then you realize oh wait, this is gonna drag out, isn't it? And then that person then twists that knife and it makes it much more painful. So it's like It's not just like ow. It's like ow, ow, ow. It is just, and it just keeps increasing, especially if you don't like needles. And me, I get very antsy when it comes to like seeing like use syringes and needles. Like I hate it, especially, if it's something mandatory, then I have to look away. I have to, because it's just something about it. It just really just like ticks me and really makes me cringe. But, and if a movie or a series can do that, then personally you succeeded for me. Now, something about this that I also do like a lot is the detective part. It's that now Donnie Wahlberg's character, who is trying to capture the Jigsaw killer, who is Tobin Bell. He his son is one of the ex-convicts, so he's doing it, one, to not just capture, but then Jigsaw is just like, oh, by the way, your son's in there. And so there's a lot more stuff on the line. It's all about like building stakes that I think this movie in particular does pretty well. Now, like I said, you're gonna, you won't like most of the characters, especially the ex-convicts that are going through all the traps. They're very much going to be like, yeah, this is, they always say like, oh, work together, but then they end up just, they always say, yeah, this is a team deathmatch, and they're just like, oh no, screw that, this is a free-for-all. And to me, that's more of, human nature. So if you like, if you were in like a group, and then that group is told, oh, you have to find this, and they don't tell you that there's only one of those, like, it's like a key to escape. So you're looking around, and then eventually you find it, but then you find out that there's only one key. Suddenly the team then becomes a free-for-all. And it's like, that's very much human nature. You don't decide like, okay, what if we use this together? It's very much a free-for-all. And, that's something that the series kind of almost like does a cliche of, where it's just like, okay, I know this is supposed to be a team effort, but I understand, but I already know where this is going to go. So it kind of becomes a cliche, but to me, it's fine because I see that very much in human nature, which, is sad, but that's what I see. So they definitely add a layer of realism into these movies. Whether it works or not is up to you. But personally, Saw 2, I think, is my favorite sequel. Unfortunately, after this one, it kind of slowly starts dwindling for me in some aspects. I'll talk about more when I get to them, but I would say, if you saw the first movie and then just watch this one after it, and then we're just like, okay, I think I'm done. It can work. Like this series reminds me, like, I'll bring it back up later, but this series very much reminds me of something like Friday the 13th, where you can watch any amount of movies you want. You can watch all I think 12 movies. You can watch, the first 4. You can watch, just a one-off, so it works. This one, while that does happen, you really kind of do need to watch them in order. Depending on what way you decide to watch it, whether it's all of them, or maybe like the first 2, or maybe the first 3, whatever, you do have to watch them in order. But I'll get back to that later. So Saw 2, personally, I would say it's just as good, or it's not as good as the first one, but it's slightly below, but it still gets a great. I still really enjoy the second movie. I think it's a lot of fun, and the fact that it did make me like cringe in my seat, you've succeeded. So good job. So then this movie made more money. and they put like a little bit more money into this one. Because they're, after the first one, it does get a lot more gorier. And especially, after 2, it definitely, like, they pumped up, the blood and gore to just 100. So, it made tons money. In fact, I think it made more money than the first movie did. And so they said, okay, guess what? We're greenlighting another one. And the way that this one kind of ended was like, this works if we come back, but also doesn't. It works if we don't. But they said, you know what? We're making a third one. So the next year in 2006, we got Saw 3. So Saw 3 came out in 2006, and again was directed by Darren Bousman. I think it's Bousman. And Leigh Whannell wrote the script, and James Wan did come back to help with the writing for the story, I believe. And this takes place a little bit after the events of 2. Now, the thing about this movie, and I'll talk about it a little bit in the next one, is that 3 and 4 kind of they're happening around the same time. So, like, there's parts in this one that won't really make a lot of sense until you watch 4. And then, not just because it's the next movie, but then there's parts in 4 where you're like, oh, okay, so this was happening during this time. So like I mentioned with the first movie, this series is very much like a jigsaw puzzle where you don't get certain pieces until certain movies. And it's like, oh, so this one fits over here. I was wondering where that piece was because I was thinking it was missing. It's very much like that. So yeah. So Saw 3 takes place after the events of 2. Now, in this movie, we have Jigsaw, who his cancer, he has cancer. It's established in the second movie that he has cancer. And so his whole reason of doing these traps is to make people like appreciate their lives, because he's very much putting people in these traps that don't appreciate their lives. Like the first movie, you have these 2 guys who on the outside, they look like just, they're just there against their will, and they were, but you find out like, oh, they did some shady stuff. Like, that's not good. And in 2, it's the same thing. Like, they're ex-convicts, so they did something to break the law. So you're like, okay, so they're basically brought in here to, basically do a new start on their lives, because, it's established throughout the movies that, Jigsaw Killer John Kramer, his life, especially in his older years, leading up to the movies, was very much like, yeah, that's pretty bad, man. That's pretty bad. Like, that sucks. So, he likes to think of himself as, oh, I'm not a killer, but after a while, you start kind of going like, okay, dude, you basically drench them in like gasoline and you're handing them the match. So like, you're giving them all the tools to potentially kill themselves. In retrospect, that means you were a part in their murder or them dying. So yes, you are a killer. Okay. But you could say he's a killer with a heart of gold because he wants to help people. And it's established in the series that, the survivors of the traps, they come out and they say like, yeah, he gave me a new respect on life. But you have no arm. Yeah, I know, but, it made me, think about life more. Yeah, but you have no arm. So it kind of gets a little like, I don't know about that kind of thing. But, it depends on how you watch it and on what you see through your eyes. But anyway, back to 3. So he has his apprentice, who's Amanda, who she was in 1 and 2. She kidnaps a doctor who is then trying to, keep him from trying to keep Kramer alive while her, I believe, husband is going through all the traps, is going through like all the stuff and everything that, happened in his life. Everything is brought back to him. And now it's up to him to decide whether or not, like, do I let this person live or do I let them die, kind of thing. So the detective story is kind of takes a back seat in this one because it's more focused on, the doctor keeping him alive and her husband going through all the traps. So it's really those are the 2 subplots. Where with 1 and 2, it was detective and then the trap story. So the detective stuff kind of takes a back seat, which may disappoint some people. But don't worry, when it gets to 4, it then gets back into detective stuff. So this one, I will say, this is the one I liked this one. But this was the one where it started kind of dwindling for me, where I was going like, okay, you're kind of like, you started out really high with the first movie and then you continued to go a little high, or you continued on that high streak with the second one. This one, that meter is slowly starting to get down, but it's only getting lowered like very little. So I think this is the movie that started the branching path of, that level's kind of going down a little bit, but I did like this movie. I did like 3. I thought it was, the traps I thought were pretty cool. Especially one involving pigs, which if saw he very much loves like the pig masks thing, but this one involves like actual pigs, and it's kind of like, ugh, like, okay. Now that trap didn't necessarily make me gag. I was just more like, okay, I would just hurry up, like, okay. So this one, it didn't get me like 2 did, because 2 just hit that little nerve in me and just wouldn't stop poking at it. This one was more just like, okay, let's just try to like throw everything gross. Like let's just throw gross at you, which unfortunately, the whole series does. But so this one, I would say I liked the story, trying to keep Kramer alive, and I liked that kind of thing. And then also the the husband going through all the traps, and then eventually when it gets to the end, it's like, oh, well, there was a bigger plan to this. And it always seems that way. Like in every movie, you think it's going to go one way, and then it potentially does, and then you're like, oh, there's actually another layer on it. It's like almost like an onion or Shrek, where it has layers, where it just keeps, it's just like you start out with one layer, and then it's like, oh wait, no, we got another one. No, we got another one. No, we got another one. And it just keeps building and building and building from there. And that's something the series does really well, is it keeps you guessing like what's going to happen. And I think even with the movies that I don't particularly think are the best, it still really does a good job. And I think this one does it pretty well, especially towards the third act. So while I don't think this one is as good as 1 and 2, it definitely like has its points where I'm like, that didn't work for me. I give this about an average. Still a very solid entry into the series, and I was still interested to see more, especially after the end of this one. It was like, okay, how are you going to continue this? And they said, well, you don't need to wait too long. Saw 4. All right. So this one takes place right after the first movie. Or, I'm sorry, not the first movie, the last movie. Where, we do deal with the death of John Kramer. Or of Jigsaw. But it's then revealed that he actually has an accomplice out there. He has other accomplices out there to basically carry on the legend of Jigsaw. So to continue the whole thing he was doing. And this one is more or less it's actually a bunch of it's a detective thing, but what if the detective thing was in the trap this time? And it's like, okay, so you're merging the two. So let's see how this goes. And so this one, I would say I liked the traps in this one more than the third film. Because I feel like with this one, they were just kind of going like, okay, so we were able to get away with this stuff. What about this stuff? And they're just like, okay, this is way more gruesome, but let's go with it. Let's see what we can do. And I will say my favorite trap in here, I would say it had to, I'm not going to spoil what it is, but we'll say it has something to do with hair. I'll just leave it at that because it is very ow. Ow, ow, ow. That hurts. Okay, stop. That hurt. And also, this movie was the first 5 minutes of this movie legitimately had me gagging. Because I was like, no, can't look at that. I can't look at that. Like I said, the first 5 minutes of the movie. And I'll just say it involves an autopsy. And I'm like, it actually showed me, I'm like, I can handle blood and gore in movies, but I think if I was tasked with doing an autopsy on dead bodies, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I would have the stomach for that. I have a strong stomach, but when it comes to that, that scene in particular, the fact that I got, gagged at an autopsy scene, mainly because of how long it goes and how just really detailed it is. It had me thinking, if I was a coroner, I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it. I would probably need a barf bag with me every 5 minutes, and if I would probably get slimmer and lose a ton of weight, and then friends would come up to me and say, dude, how did you lose all this weight? Oh, I work as a coroner. So, yeah, I just don't bring food because I just can't, because I'll puke it up. So, the fact that the series was able to do that, where a lot of the time, people avoid the series because it is so violent, because it is so graphic. And when I went into it going, it may get me once, but, I think I'll be fine. Nope. I was like, nope. Okay, I'm looking away out that part. But then the rest I was fine with. So I think the traps were a lot better in this one than in 3, personally. And, how they're able to, keep up with, the story, despite the fact that Jigsaw has been dead. Or is dead. And then especially from this point, as the movies get on, it's like, okay, how is this happening? And a lot of people don't remember, oh no, it's actually he had an apprentice, or he has apprentices who are doing this for him. After he died, they had specific instructions that after he died, they continued to do this. So, it's really intriguing to see like how they go. And then the new apprentice is actually doing stuff that, Jigsaw wouldn't do, where he's making it more impossible to escape. It feels very much like, like with Jigsaw, with his traps, yeah, you'll get your arm cut off, but then you then find the key that you need, you open the door, and then you're free. With this new apprentice, you'll get your arm chopped off, you'll find the key, open the door, and then get shotgun blast and you're dead. It's like, that's not fair. It's like, so you basically just did it to, just be ruthless and just cruel, like more cruel. So, it kind of like establishes that, like, okay, who is this person? Who is this apprentice that is doing this stuff? And the fact that they were able to do it for, this one movie and then continuing on to the next movie, because 5 takes place immediately after this one ends. So, that's actually something the series does really well, is that, after one movie, it feels very much like, like something like John Wick, where, at the end of 2, then 3 picks up like immediately after, like I would say maybe like 30 minutes, after the events of the last movie. So it kind of does that like nice, like you kind of watch them back to back. And also something about the series that I do like is that each movie is pretty short, depending on which one you watch. Like each one is around like an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes long. And so you can kind of binge a couple of them in one day or one night, and then the next night you just binge the next few. So it is a series that is meant to be binged, and definitely one where if you see the next movie, unless you have a really good memory with the previous film, you might want to rewatch the previous film before watching the new one. So the series does that really well. And with 4 is, like I said, with 3 was kind of when it started dwindling for me, and 4 was no exception. 4 was just like, hey, I still liked it, but I don't think it's as good as 3. So, and then we'll get to one that I didn't think was good for the most part, but we'll get to that. We'll get to those actually. But, 4, you could watch it this way. Saw 1, 2, 3, and then you're good. If you watch 4, then you definitely need to watch 5, and then you definitely need to watch 6, and then you definitely need to watch the 7, and so forth. So it's, that kind of just, weird thing, which I'll bring it up later at the end when I finish reviewing all of these films. That, the series is a series where you can watch it in multiple different ways and in multiple different perspectives. But anyway, with 4, it's very much like the detective through the trap story. And, with this one, they're kind of like, all right, they're figuring everything out, and, it's all really it's still interesting. Oh, and also I want to bring up that, both Leigh, Whannell, and James Wan, they're done. They still stayed on to produce them, but as far as writing, they're done. They have nothing to do with it anymore. So they're gone. So it's a completely new writing staff, and just everybody involved is brand new. But even with the two of them, they still managed to find an interesting story to continue, especially off of 3, where that one Whannell and Wan wrote. So it is very interesting to see them continuing the series like this. And this one I would give an average as well, where it's like, okay, it's just a notch below 3, but I still enjoy it. There's still some interesting and gruesome traps to watch, but it's still very interesting. So, there you go. So then they then said, okay, well, this one, we would need to, at the end of this one, we would need to make another one because we would kind of be ending it on a, like, what's going to happen next kind of thing. And so then the next year, we got Saw 5. Saw 5 in 2008. So Darren Bousman did not come back for 5. He later comes back for another movie, which I'll bring up. But we have director David Hackl, which this was his feature debut. And apparently he had worked on the other films. He had worked on in the special effects department. So this movie takes place like immediately after 4. So this one, it's about, a detective that is investigating the murders committed by Jigsaw from the previous films, but then also becomes the target of Jigsaw's traps, and also realizes that somebody close to him could potentially be a suspect as Jigsaw's new apprentice. So it becomes that, the detective in the trap story again, but also, looking on the outside and going okay, now it's almost like a detective v killer story. So it's okay, that's pretty cool. I like that. And the fact that this takes place immediately after 4 helps. So this one, we have the detective who is or agent Strahan, who was in 4 and kind of trying to figure out what was going on. But you also have Jigsaw's accomplice, who is named Hoffman, who is now the lieutenant for the same bureau, and has been put in charge and leading the Jigsaw murders, even though he's the one that's doing it. So, Strahan is slowly figuring out maybe he's it. So, it becomes like I said, but it more of a detective v killer, but it also feels like a detective v detective story. So it's what if these two detectives, one of them is trying to stop the killer and one of them is the killer, but is able to use his detective stasis or his stasis in the FBI to cover that up. So it becomes really interesting how they're able to do that. Or do that like clockwork. So it's really cool to see how they do it. And also, the way it's written. Now, normally when it comes to a series like this, you would expect it to just be mindless stuff, mindless characters, gore being thrown in your face, traps that are cool. And there are that. But there's also a detective story underneath it. And a very compelling one at that, too. That makes it really cool and interesting. And keeps you guessing as you go. And the fact that this is the 5th movie, and normally in a horror series, they wouldn't care at this point. Story would just completely be dropped off. Something like Nightmare on Elm Street Part 5. He was literally just hanging out on the beach wearing sunglasses, cracking jokes, and just throwing one-liners at people. Or Friday the 13th Part 5, where it wasn't even Jason, because 4 he was quote-unquote killed, because it was supposed to be the last movie. It wasn't until 6 where they put a stick in him, and then the stick gets electrified, or it gets struck by lightning, and then he comes back. But that was the point where it was just we don't care. We don't care. This series definitely cares. They understand okay, what people want to see is, gore. We're going to give it to them, but also we're going to put a very interesting and engaging detective story underneath it. And they do it pretty well. Like, I'll talk about it later, but this series very much, like, you know, you can watch from multiple different perspectives. Like, one, watch it just for the gore, and two, watch it for the actual story. Now, it's very complex, but it's there, and it's good for most of the time, for most of the movies. But it's really all about the storytelling in this. You know, I think a lot of people misconstrued that there's an actual story in this series. While whether you like it or not, or you follow it or not, it's there, and I like it. I think it's cool. And also, you know, the traps in this one, I don't think are as memorable like 4, but they are still pretty intriguing and like keep you like cringing and on the edge of your seat. So yay, there you go. And you know, the way that 5 ends, I feel like they wanted 5 to be the end, where they were kind of going like, okay, this could potentially be the end. You know, let's kind of not necessarily go out with a bang, but more of just like, let's do this. And if we don't come back, it works as the end. But if we do, we can still try to figure out what we can do. Much like what 3 did. Where 3, the way that ended was very much like, we can end it here, or, you know, if we make more, we can actually see if we can pick up off of this. This one, I think, was more easier. It was an easier approach than 3 to 4, where with this one, it's like, okay, if we end it here, great. If not, then we have an easy way to continue this. So, but this to the lucky to them, this made money, so they made another film. But I really did like this one. I think I would put this one on the level of 4, where it's like, okay, I liked it. I didn't like it as much as 3, and then 3 I didn't like as much as 2 and 1. So, but I would say put it on that same like bar as 4, so it's an average. Where I did like, you know, the continuation of the story, and especially how this one ended, was very much like, oh, that sucks. So it is pretty. It is nice. You know, I enjoyed it. I think it's cool. So yeah, I would give this one an average. You know, and of course, you know, the throwaway characters, of course, they're there, and, you know, gore being flown at the screen, of course, that's going to be there. So yeah, that's pretty much the Saw trope at this point in the franchise. So yeah, so the way this one, like I said, the way this one ended was kind of like, let's see how this goes and see, like, maybe we can make this one the end, but if not, we can actually make a way out. And so this one made money. So the next year in 2009, we got Saw 6. Saw 6. Great. Good night, everybody. But, okay. We are now on Saw 6, which, I'm going to be completely honest, is actually one of the better sequels. It was, you know, it was kind of a little refresher because, you know, 4 and 5 were, you know, or especially 3, 4, and 5, those really felt like mellow compared to like this one, because this one, it's about you know, it takes place after the events of 5, and this time you have Jigsaw's wife going to battle with Hoffman, because the way that, you know, like I said with 5, is that the way that Hoffman is doing these things, he's trying to continue the Jigsaw legacy, is in a way that won't allow the people to basically live. It's going to, kill them no matter what. And Jigsaw's wife is like, no, I'm not going to let you do that. So then it becomes kind of a, like battling each other. But meanwhile, people going through the traps is actually a guy who runs a health insurance company, and all the people that are like in the actual traps are people that work for him in the company, and he's he's unhappy with the fact that the health insurance made decisions that only like patients and their doctors should make. And so he basically goes through all the traps and decides like whoever lives or dies. And also the cool thing too is that, when I saw this, it has, you would know him as Roderick from the Wimpy Kid movies. This is like the only other movie he did besides that and Oppenheimer. This is like the only other movie he did. And in fact, this came first over Wimpy Kid. So the producers of Wimpy Kid saw this movie and probably went, yeah, he's pretty good. Let's get him to be like let's get him to be the older brother who plays in a band that's not particularly good, but it's funny anyway. So, and is only known for that one role. So, anyway. So, this one is a new director by Kevin Greutert, I believe that's how to say his name, who directs this and 7, and then comes back to do 10. Now, I will say that this one is actually a pretty good one in the series. It definitely, after 3, 4, 5, it was kind of like starting to like go down that like the chart, like I mentioned. This one was kind of the one where it started slowly getting back up, and then 7 happens, but we'll get to 7. But I really enjoyed this one. I think the traps are pretty good. They seem a little simpler than a lot of of the traps in the other movies are, but it's still interesting to see what's going to happen. And I was pretty engaged with the story. It does a good job with its pacing. Actually, I think all the movies do a pretty good job with its pacing. And the director of this one, I believe he worked on the other movies as an editor. He edited the other movies, and then he made his way to make to direct the films. Which it's kind of interesting that way, where it's like after 4, the directors actually were like part of the crew of the other movies, of the previous films. So it's kind of like interesting. This is also when the series kind of started dipping in box office money. Like it was still like a couple $1 million to do, but they weren't making like 100 millions. They were maybe making like 60. So it was really kind of when they started like people were kind of going like, okay, it's just another Saw film. We don't need to see it. And so it's just like, okay, like it felt very disposable. So when this one didn't make as much money as they wanted to, they made the decision for the next film to be called The Final Chapter, but I'll get to that one later. I did enjoy this one. I thought it was pretty good. Like I said, I think this is one of the better sequels. And while the traps aren't, I think the traps in some of the other films I think were better than this one. This one seemed a little bit more simpler, where it's kind of like, okay, like, all right, we'll just do this. Especially like the first 5 minutes, I was just like, oh, like, okay, that sucks. But Then after that, especially when it gets to the insurance company and them going through all the traps, it felt very like simpler on that one. So it's just kind of like, okay, like it's, but I will say my favorite one was what it's known as the shotgun carousel. I will say that one was my favorite. And I was like, all right, I like that one. So, this one was a solid entry. I really enjoyed 6. I think it's an average, but it's like a high average. So to me, like, I think this one's better than 3, 4, and 5. But, it's still not as great as like 2 and 1, but I still thoroughly enjoyed this one. And so I like, personally, it's like a high grade, or I'm sorry, a low grade or a high average. It's around that margin. So the studio started realizing, like, okay, the Saw films after, I would say, 3 started kind of not making as much money as they wanted to anymore. So they said, okay, you know what? Let's try to finish this thing up. Let's do a 7, but we'll call it the end. And so then in 2010, only 6 years after the first movie, we got Saw the Final Chapter. Saw the Final Chapter, or Saw 3D. Or Saw 3D, the Final Chapter, or whatever Lionsgate wants to call it. So, this was supposed to be the final movie. And it was for a little bit. But as soon as it makes money, they can say, hey, it's going to make more money. And this one did make a lot of money. But the thing is that they also did this in 3D. I don't know if they shot it in 3D or they just enhanced it into 3D. But that was another way for them to say, hey, we can put Saw in 2D and in 3D and make more money that way, which is usually the gimmick when it comes to 3D movies, is that they're not shot in 3D and they're just enhanced to 3D. Like, they edited it to make it in 3D to make more money. But I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of 3D stuff, unless it's something like people tell me like it's absolutely necessary to see it in 3D, then I will. But I don't know. To me, it's just been kind of a cheap gimmick where I'm like, I don't need to see, something like Friday the 13th in 3D. I don't really need to see that, especially if it's like constantly stuff being like, like purposely thrown in your face. So I don't know. That's just me. So the fact that this was Saw the Final Chapter, they had big shoes to fill. That, like, all right, this is the end. Like, this is it. We're finishing up. This is the end. Unfortunately, it more goes out like a whimper, especially after the highs of something like 6. And the fact that it is the same director as 6, it's the same directors, same writers. So it's like, what happened? So this one, I feel like they were trying a little too hard and also trying to fit a lot into a 90-minute movie. So what I feel like it could have been a little better is maybe if 6 and 7 were spliced maybe into one movie, or do something where it's like Saw 6 was supposed to be part 1 of the final chapter, and then this 7th film could have been part 2. Or, and they just, splice and they just mix them all together. So I feel like that would have been a little better. So if they like edited 6 and 7 to be one film somehow, I feel like that would have been a little better. Because with this one, it, especially, like I said, after something like the highs of 6, 7 kind of just like downgrades that. So especially like, 6 was like, it was tanking up on the meter. 7 just goes, just starts going like right back down. But I will say, the traps, they still keep it up. They still really do keep it up, especially like the first 5 minutes, like the opening trap of the film, was like, whoa, like, okay, that's pretty good. I like that one. And it seemed very simple, but like, okay, like that was interesting. So the traps, they definitely keep, pretty good and consistent, and they still keep it up. But then, when it comes to the story, you have this guy who is comes out, he ends up being a fraud and saying that he did survive like Jigsaw's traps, even though he's never been in one. And so Jigsaw, when he was still alive, like all these people interacted with Jigsaw, with John Kramer, before he died. So that's what I mean. Like, a lot of people like think like, okay, how can this happen? And he's dead, but he ended up doing him wrong. And, like I said, it's all like flashbacks. There's a lot of flashbacks in this series. Like, I feel like this series has more flashbacks than Lost, where, it just constantly keeps going to the past to the point where you're just like, I don't understand anything anymore. I don't understand the concept of time anymore. And, you've probably seen it. This movie has, honestly, my favorite thing to make like someone look younger is that, a lot of movies today, they use de-aging. They use CGI to like de-age the actor to make them look younger. But with this movie, they said, no, we're going to give Tobin Bell a backwards hat and a hoodie and say, you know what, we'll call it a day. And you probably have seen it like somewhere on the internet, like a meme and stuff like that. But to me, it's just always been funny, where I'm just like, yeah, you clearly didn't want to spend the money to de-age the actor, especially it being like 2010. And, CGI was kind of in this like weird spot where there would be something good like Tron Legacy, but then something else would come around and it's just like, ooh, or like Hoodwinked. And where it's like, ooh, like, okay, this does not look good. So it was, and also they're just kind of like, this is a soft film. We don't want to use CGI, because something about the series is that it is a very practical series. I've talked about it before, but it's a very practical series, and I enjoy that. So comes to the practical stuff, this movie still keeps it up. Despite it being like one of the weakest of the series, it still manages to keep it up. But, the fact that this one was supposed to be like the end of it all, it feels very much like a letdown, especially, if you get to the end when it's like it's supposed to be like a big twist going on. And I'm like, okay, it's interesting to see this character again, but, I feel like this would have been more effective if you did this maybe like 3-4 movies ago, instead of you're on the 7th film and you save it for like the last. I feel like it would have been better if you like slowly started introducing this like 3-4 films ago. Like, I feel like that would have been, it would have impacted me a little bit more. I have talked to people, and some people say that they liked what they did. Some people said that they hated what they did. Personally, I think what they did was interesting. I thought it was cool, and especially cool to see this particular person back. I won't spoil it, but it was like kind of like it felt like you didn't know what to do, so you just said, "Hey, let's just throw them back here and just say, hey, this is what happened." And it's like, okay, all right. I don't quite understand the logic of what you're doing, but okay. So, 7 kind of, especially something after 6 where it was such a like the series started rising again. This one definitely felt like it got like a gear came off, and then it just slowly started causing other gears to like pop off. So it really just kind of like was like, oh, like, okay, this is pretty disappointing. And especially with it being, it's supposed to be the final chapter. So it's like, wow, that was a big letdown. So personally, this one, it's a fine. A lot of that goes to, the gore, the fact that they still keep it up, the traps are still interesting. I do like some of the things they do, like with some of the characters, and it is kind of like like, that's kind of what I expected, but it was still satisfying. So it was kind of cool, like in some regards. But other than that, if those things weren't there, this would be a pretty bad film. And I know a lot of people that said that they hate this film. I don't hate it. I tolerate it, but I do go if I was given a choice between watching this or one of the other movies in the series, it would depend on what film the series it would be, but I would more than likely choose, 9 times out of 10, I would choose that other film. So personally, it's a fine for me. So then we get a break in the films, and because they didn't really know what to do after that, because this one made a lot of money. It actually got the series back up in the box office. So they're going okay, what are we going to do? Because we want to do another film, but we said it's the end. No, screw it. We're going to do another one. And so then 7 years later, in 2017, we got Jigsaw. So no longer called Saw 8, but it's Jigsaw. Okay, so this one I would have to say that this one is probably the weakest one in the series. And I know a lot of people are not going to agree with that. They're going to say that 7 was the weakest, but mainly because, from the trailer alone, I went, okay, this looks pretty intriguing. And then I saw the movie and I went, this is what you did? This is it? It was, it's like, okay, all right. So this one is directed by the Spierig brothers. I think it was Peter and Michael. And, I've enjoyed some of their other films, like Daybreakers, which if you haven't seen that film, it's a cool vampire movie. It plays a lot some maybe like I Am Legend, where it's vampires, they live in society, they do the things, they go to their jobs, they do their own things, but then it plays with what if they run out of humans and then they run out of blood to keep them alive? Then they start turning into these grotesque creatures, and it's a really cool movie if you haven't seen it, and I highly recommend it. And the other film I saw was the Winchester movie, which let's say that I that's not even a word, it's just a sound that came out. It was just so just move on from that. But they directed this one. So this one, it plays after the events of 7, but at the same time it does the flashback stuff again, where it's but it takes place before the first movie. And it's wait, what? Okay. So the plot of this one is detectives have figured out that somebody is going around impersonating Jigsaw again. So we have that going on. But at the same time, we also have 4 people, well, technically 5, but 4 people, they just wake up and they have buckets on their heads and they're chained, chained to the wall and stuff like that. And the 4, like I said, technically the 5, they're going through all of the traps all together. They're supposed to be working as a team on this. So, and there are parts in it where, they want to not work together. And also, I do like what they do with it, because you realize that these people that are going through all the traps, like, oh yeah, there's not supposed to be good people. So, and I like how each one had something about him that was just like, oh, that's pretty messed up. So it was like, oh yeah, that's pretty unforgivable what you did. So I don't understand why, you're potentially going through this, but it's just me. But so it's kind of interesting, but other than that, this movie doesn't feel like it matters. Like there's no big reason that why this one exists or why this one needs to kind of take place. It feels like a standalone sequel, but then they also try to bash you over the head like, oh no, it's a sequel. And it's like, okay, but I feel like this would have been better if it was kind of like a standalone, much like what the next movie did. But it just, the gore, it is cool. It's very minimum, but it's cool. They play it more like a psychological type thing. So it is kind of cool, but the people going through the traps alone, of course, like, you're not really supposed to like any of them, like in the previous films. But even like the detectives, you're just kind of like, I just don't care. I don't care about anybody. I don't care who lives or dies. I don't really care to see who this impersonator is. And like, I just don't really care. So, you're watching a movie that while it's part of the series, and I guess you could say is crucial to the series, it really doesn't feel like it matters and doesn't really need to be there. So it kind of feels like almost like a little black sheep in it, where it's just like, okay, like, I don't, So I've talked to people who have watched this series a couple of times, and most of them said that they skipped this one. So, while it presents some interesting ideas, it really just kind of doesn't execute them very well. And then especially, when it's found out the impersonator, it's kind of like okay, like that's kind of what I guessed. Like, okay. Like, all right, whatever. So I feel like this one has some good ideas. They just don't know how to execute them well. So, personally, this movie is kind of a fine. It's very much kind of on the level of something like 7, but 7, I think, presents its ideas a little better than this one does. But that's just me. So personally, this is like a fine. The traps are still cool, but that can only get you so much. You need to have more in there to make this interesting and unique. And unfortunately, this one doesn't really work in certain places. So, but I do like how each trap, it does require like one of the 5. So it's just like it's specific to those people. And that's something that kind of the previous movies didn't really do a whole lot, but they did kind of like say like, okay, this kind of, this could like be linked to this person. And some of them are, but then after a while, it feels like they get lost with it. So this one kind of brought it back and said, no, let's actually make traps individually with a specific person. And so I like how they did that. But like I said, this movie tries to present ideas and then especially like make it be like, oh, it's a prequel. And it's like, yeah, but it doesn't work. Okay. So, I would say watch this movie if you want to watch the entire series, but if you don't, you're really not missing out on anything. especially in the next few movies, they don't even really reference this one. Actually, I don't think they reference it at all. So you can kind of like watch it just as a side thing, but not take it fully. So it's just kind of like, all right, it's fine. Then we get a little break in the movies because this came out and they were kind of going, all right, well, let's kind of step back and rethink this. And so then in 2021, we get Spiral from the Book of Saw. Spiral from the Book of Saw. All right. So this one feels like they looked at the previous films and went, okay, let's make this different. How can we make this like different? How can we, change this around? How can we make it unique? And the fact that you have like somebody like Chris Rock coming in and saying, hey, let's do this. And it's like, all right, let's try it. And the fact that you have like, him in it, and this is really when he started expanding more and becoming like more of a serious dramatic actor, which I've always thought like, comedians can make really good dramatic actors. I mean, I talked about it in my It Chapter 2 review with Bill Hader. But comedians can also be like really dramatic actors. And, Chris Rock, I think, does a really good job here, and also the fact that it is from the same director. It's Darren Bousman returned from 2, 3, and 4. So you have that old blood in there. And then, but unfortunately, this one is written by the same people who did the last film, which was Jigsaw. And so it was kind of like, I don't know about this. Like, okay. Like, all right. But, when I saw it, it's... I liked what they were doing. I liked how different it felt. I liked the first 2/3. I think Chris Rock's acting is really good. I think it's very believable. And it's cool that Samuel Jackson is in the Saw film, which is kind of interesting. But hearing about that, like the fact he was in a Saw film, I was thinking to myself, like, I don't really see him being like helpless, because he just has that, because Samuel Jackson just has that, presence, not just as an actor, but as a person that you just don't want to deal with. You just don't want to mess with him. And the fact that, his career has been, primarily, not all the time, roles that, are very much like, you don't want to mess with him because you will regret it if you do. When I heard he was going to be in a Saw film, I went, I don't really know how I feel about this, because I don't think, if he's going to be in a trap, I don't think he's going to be, I don't know if I see him being helpless. And so it kind of like, I kind of like, tilted my head a bit, like in confusion, but was still going like, all right, let's check it out. And so, I liked how different this one felt. It feels more like a detective than I would say some of the other movies do. It goes back to that detective stuff. And I was liking what they were doing. And the traps, while I think they're kind of on the low grade, it's not the traps that they were really focusing on here. It was more... This one feels more psychological than with the other movies, where they are horror/splatter films. This one feels more like a psychological detective thriller, but with those things of horror and gore in there. But I would say on a trap level, this is kind of on the low grade, but it's not really focusing on that. And so I liked where this was going. Then the plot of this one is Chris Rock finds out that there's another impersonator and he has to go track him down because this imposter is specifically killing people on the force, and specifically people that are like, like he works with or is close to him, and is close to him specifically. So he's trying to figure out like, what's really going on here? Who is this person? And the thing about this is I was liking what they were doing. I liked the first 2 acts. Then when it hits the 3rd act and it's revealed who it is, I go, well, I guess that from a mile away, especially, I won't spoil, but this person, they're there, and then it's, they then do something where it's kind of like, oh, okay, are they really, like, are they really gone? Like what's going on? And then they pop back up, and they're like, oh, I'm the imposter. I'm like, I guess that because of this. So like, I was kind of like, oh, that's a big letdown. Like, it would have been interesting if like they threw a curveball and it made sense. With this one, it was kind of just like, you basically just, it was like you were a duck, and instead of somebody leaving you a whole bunch of breadcrumbs for you to follow, and then eventually you get to the big piece of bread, they just threw the bread at you and then just left. They just walked away. So, and it's not as satisfying as following the breadcrumbs. Especially if it's a detective thing, you're following the breadcrumbs, you're following the puzzle pieces. So I felt like the 3rd act was really much of a letdown, and at times I didn't really, I was kind of thinking like, maybe they didn't know how to really end this thing, or maybe they did, and they just thought like it was going to hit harder than a lot of people expected, but to me it didn't, and I was like, well, that was a big letdown. And especially when it got to the end, I was just like, okay, like, whatever. So I really hate seeing movies have like this big potential and I start liking them, and then the 3rd act they then throw a potential twist, like something like M. Night Shyamalan does, where sometimes it works, or in some cases it doesn't, and it's just really dumb and stupid. Or in this case, it's like very obvious, where it's, like I said, it's like you getting hit in the face with bread instead of you like slowly following breadcrumbs, and then eventually you find the big piece of bread. It's when they're just throwing it at you, and it's like, okay, I kind of saw this, wait, where'd you go, kind of thing. So it sucks because I liked how different this one felt. It wasn't focusing on the traps as much. While they're there, that's not what its main goal was. Like I said, like this one, the rest of the movies feel like horror, like splatter horror films. This one feels like more like a psychological, like mystery thriller film with those like little hints of horror and little hints of splatter. And while it works for the first 2 acts, once it hits the 3rd, it just derails, or it just doesn't work. And so, I mean, I don't think this is as bad as people say it is, but man, I would say this is probably like a low average or like a high fine, because I will say, like, the traps, while they're very few and small and aren't as grand as like the past ones, they are effective. And Chris Rock's acting, like, he is the show. He is the star. And so, he's really shown, like, through different things, especially like this, where I'm like, wow, comedians could be really good dramatic actors. And he does a really good job with this too. And especially something like it being part of the Saw series, where you could have easily just sleptwalked through it. He's like, no, I'm actually gonna give it my all on this one. And Samuel Jackson is really cool too. And so like always. But, you know, it from what I was expecting, they do deliver on some regards, but then they just derail it after a while, which sucks. Then they went, all right, well, that didn't work. Let's somehow bring John Kramer back. Let's bring Tobin Bell back. And so then last year in 2023, we got Saw X. Saw X. Wow. They made it to this milestone. Saw X. Saw 10. All right, so this movie takes place between 1 and 2. So you could watch 1 and then watch this and then watch 2. So we have Tobin Bell returning as Kramer, and he travels to Mexico to get a procedure done to cure his cancer, but later finds out that it was a scam, prompting him to pretty much kidnap those who was responsible and then put them through these traps. Now, when I heard that they were going to do another movie and that it was going to take place between 1 and 2, I was like, okay, most of the time when movies do that, they wait way too long for them to happen. And so I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work. And I also thought, like, don't you think the series is kind of, like, done by now? Like, they're just done. Like, they don't want to do it anymore. And the fact that Kevin Greutert came back to direct the film. So I was like, all right, he did a really good job with 6. 7 wasn't very good. And then this is the same writers as Jigsaw and Spiral. And I went, I don't know. So my expectations were very, very low. Even after watching the trailer, I'm like, this looks promising, but I can also see where they can shoot themselves in the foot. So let's just go into it, not expecting anything, and maybe we'll be pleasantly surprised. I was pleasantly surprised on how good this one was. And I will say that this one is probably my second favorite sequel out of all of them. I know a lot of people say that this one is the best one, is the best sequel. I've heard people say that this is the best Saw film. No. To me, I still prefer 1 and 2. This one, I would say, goes to like a third place, where it's just like, it's in the top 3. Because I really enjoyed this one. I was really surprised. And like I mentioned, there was 2 times when I gagged, and the first one was with 4. This was the one. This is the other one that I gagged at. Mainly one that has to do with, I won't be too specific, but it involves taking a limb off and then sticking something in that particular wound. And I was just like, okay, this is already just like, it's already gross, like, right there. But then you did that, and I'm like, oh, like, no, can't handle that one. And this is definitely one of the few ones that I would say makes it hard. It makes it hard to watch. You know, this one is definitely like a hard to watch one out of, the rest of the movies. So right then and there, you already did a good job with it. It was cool that, they managed to find a way to make this work, and especially, put it between 1 and 2. They found a way to make it work. And so good job with that. And, I was pleasantly surprised on how good this one did. And it also seems like not just this film, because this film did really well, and it has this, like, the same budget as the previous films. But, which shows that, like, you can make horror films that don't necessarily need to have a lot of money, and horror fans will go see it. Like, somebody said, like, horror fans are dedicated, and very much are. Like, we will go see garbage to then see something good. Like, we are that dedicated. So, I don't understand, like, why, a lot of studios don't want to take risks and do, like, certain things, like, especially with horror. I would say the only studios that are really doing that are, like, A24 and Neon, where they're taking risks on something that major studios don't really want to do. And so it's kind of like like, I would watch this, like, more than these other films they're pumping out. Or even something like, like Shudder, even. Like, Shudder's pumping out good stuff lately. So, but when it comes to this one, they actually found a way to make me care about John Kramer. Because they said, like, he had a terminal cancer, but I was always kind of going, like, but you're just kind of, you're doing this to like, I understand, like, you're doing this to people and trying to give them a second chance, but you realize that even if they do that, they're probably just going to convert back to their old ways or not even attempt to try. So, it's kind of like so you're kind of just, it's like what I said before. You're pouring gasoline all over them and then you're handing them the match. It still counts. Like, it still means you were a partner in crime. Like, you gave them the tools and then they did the rest. But, it's still like no. So you're still a murderer. But he's a murderer with a heart of gold. And so, this one, I would say, the traps definitely, like, were, like, I feel like this was the one where they had, it feels like with this one, with the traps, they had, like, a list of ones they wanted to do, but they couldn't do it at the time, so then they just wrote it down. And then they said, okay, maybe for another film they'll do it. And then they said, okay, what about this one? We can do all this stuff. And then Lionsgate just said, okay, you can do it. And so they did it, and whoa, boy, does this one get really, really, really gory and really and pretty gross and pretty hard to watch. Like, if you're able to, like, barely survive watching the other films, this one's going to test you. Like I said, like, I have a strong stomach, and this one made me gag, like, once. But I was like, oh, no, not watching that. And so, and also the story, too. The story is pretty intriguing. Like, it gets brought up in, like, little doses here and there, but, it is pretty interesting. And, I also like the fact that they didn't put it in the U.S. because while they're never specific on where the other films take place, they're never specific on that. This one, they said, okay, it's Mexico. And after a while, like, it actually takes a bit for it to eventually become a Saw film. And actually, the fact that this movie is almost 2 hours long, it was like, okay, so, like, the first 45 minutes really didn't feel like a Saw film. They throw the Saw elements in there, but overall it was like, okay, like, this doesn't really feel like a Saw film. So I like how it changed its tune a bit. And then once it hits the Saw stuff, it's like, this is the stuff we remember. This is the stuff we came for. So, I like how they took a chance on it again, and this movie did very, very, very well. That the fact that I think, like, a little bit after it, they announced that 11 is in the works, which was supposed to come out this year, but they ended up pushing it to next year. So and to be honest, I don't need I don't need to see a new Saw film every year, like they've done before. I don't need to see that again, especially, if you're gonna take a little break and actually get it right again, like with this, so take your time. So this one was a pleasant surprise for me. I was not expecting this one to be as good as I thought it was going to, and I give this one a grade. Like I said, it's not. I wouldn't say it's my favorite of the series, like a lot of people think. I will say it's one of the better sequels. So I would say I would go the first movie, 2, this one, and 6, and then whatever. To be completely honest, and then whatever. So I really like this one. So yeah, I'd give it a grade. And that was the Saw series. 10 movies. And I thought the Halloween one was going to kill me. Or the Friday 13th one was going to kill me. Nope, it was this one. So that's the Saw series. This one I've been meaning to do. In fact, I wanted to do this one ever since I saw X. Or wanted to do, like, I would do this before I saw X, but thought, like, let's put X in here. And I planned to do it after I watched 10, and just it never happened. Time got away from me. But now that, the 13 reviews of Frights are coming to an end, and because last Halloween I did the Halloween series, I thought it was only appropriate to do another horror series, and I thought, well, I've been sitting on the Saw series for a while, so let's do it. So here we go. So happy Halloween, everybody. Thank you for listening to this. Listen to me talk about Saw for a long time. And have a happy Halloween.